each other as human beings and what we're really like. It's a way of saying who we are. And when we know each other, we gain empathy, friendship, community, and robust, real interconnections. So we want to share some stories of resilience with you tonight that Elissa has written. And I think at the end of that, I'll share a story about what happened to me when my resilience broke down during my second cancer summer in 2022. So far, so good. Everybody's good. So what is resilience? And why do we think it's one of the essential aspects of being human? Unlike grief, which Elissa and I dealt with on Yom Kippur, resilience is not just an emotion. It's what the Greek philosophers would call a virtue, a stance we take in the world that is developed. It's like a muscle that uses our emotions, our knowledge of our own emotions, our mind and various perspectives to help us get through difficult times and return to some degree to functioning. Parenthetically, grief is transformational, right? Grief comes to you and then you have changed forever because of it. Resilience, I think, has a connotation of getting back to some degree where I was, not breaking, getting back. Resilience, we think, is almost impossible also to develop in isolation. Can't happen. It's not good to have grief in isolation, but grief sometimes is private. Resilience has to be shared because it's like a muscle, and we have to decide to learn to be resilient, and ideally learn how to be resilient over time so that when we really need it, we have it. Now, Bruce Perry, a PhD, MD, has something called a neurosequential model. It wouldn't, it's a big word. I don't even know what it means. Neurosequential model. He says, after trauma, we need a therapeutic web of relationships and ideas. Humans, this is a great word, great insight, it's like a bumper sticker. Humans are relationally contagious. Our feelings and behaviors are reinforced by the people we associate with. So being resilient means having a web of people, or starts with having a web of people with whom you can share and get through the darkness, which we can't skip over. Elissa has 4 stories of resilience to share with us. Like good stories, they're multi-layered. So after she reads each story, we'll sit in silence for a few minutes. Very, very hard for me. And let it sink in and work its way into us. And then we can talk about each story in turn. The first story is called The ER. Is that right?
Sure.
Okay.
Hello. Is my microphone on, right? Okay. Not so long ago, a jar of gefilte fish, a bottle of Manischewitz, and a slab of sidewalk met on my forehead. Goodness, I thought as I hit the ground, what is all this glass and blood, and why are all these jellied potatoes rolling around? Drivers averted their eyes and passed by. Pedestrians crossed to the other side of the road. I couldn't blame them, the blood was bountiful. Still, a couple of hours later, I found myself on a gurney in an emergency room waiting for a CAT scan, a poster child for hazardous biofluid. An aide wearing a hijab was strolling down the hall on her way somewhere else. She glanced over and did a double take. "Is no one helping you?" she said in a strong accent. I shook my head, but carefully because fluid was flying, and she disappeared. Just like the pedestrians and the drivers, I thought, human nature never ends. A minute later, she reappeared with an armful of warm washcloths. "I will help you," she said, and began gently to cleanse everything in need of cleaning. The skull, the forehead, the chin, the chest, the arms, the elbows, the wrists, the fingers. It was an uphill job. There were few parts not in need, but she persisted. I do not like to see someone lying on a gurney covered in blood waiting for a CAT scan, she said, which struck me as both comforting and oddly specific. As she cleansed, she talked. She was no stranger to blood, and not just because of her profession. A couple of months earlier, she had helped her mother to flee from Afghanistan. Racing to catch the plane, her mother had tripped on the escalator and slammed into sharp metal. This was a variant of gefilte fish and the sidewalk, only instead of strolling down pavement somewhere, they were leaving their homeland forever. In the Kabul emergency room, it seemed like care would take an eternity. Lines were long, chairs were filled with patients in urgent need, but they had an imperative plane to catch and no second chance. So she shouldered her way authoritatively to the front desk, told them she was a medical professional, and if they would just give her the supplies and a letter from the doctor for the plane, she would cleanse and treat her mother's wounds herself. And that is how the two of them left their country, out of one life into another. As she talked, she was gently patting me, and piles of crimson claws were accumulating in a corner of the gurney. The cleaner I became, the more I wanted to listen. How was her mother now? What had they left behind? What, if anything, had they come to? But the CT techs were here now. As they loosened the brakes of the gurney, my aide gathered the washcloths, adjusted her hijab, and started to stroll away again. I'm supposed to be on a break, she said over her shoulder, and murmured something in another language. I believe it was a prayer. Then she turned back. You know, she said, I always feel better when I feel kind.
Do you really think I should talk?
Go right ahead.
What a complicated story. How many moments of resilience were there when we were planning this? That was a question I was going to throw out to you. How many moments of resilience were there and where did they come from? And Elissa said it felt like homework, like close reading of her story. And maybe her story doesn't deserve a close reading. I don't actually know what's behind it for you. But there are these moments of resilience. One of them is resilience of the person with her mom. In the airport, they're fleeing for their lives from Afghanistan. And somehow she uses her training and herself to push herself forward, feels power to take control of her moment. Resilience for you. I have the rough draft of Elissa's. You'll never work with me again if I say this sentence, I'm afraid. I hope you will. In Elissa's rough draft, she said, I always feel better when I'm kind. One could write a whole essay on those 9 words. I always feel better when I feel kind, or however, I didn't count them right. I always feel better when I feel kind. So maybe our life is an essay, right? The way we live is the essay. Should we have somebody say something? Does anybody?
Paula, you wanted to. Yeah, I just have somebody to listen, and the air system is noisy, so if they can turn that up somehow, I don't know if that's possible. Did anyone have trouble here? Is there some feedback? There's a what?
There's feedback.
Yeah, there is a little feedback that I heard also. We'll work on that. You can't turn off the floor because it's our air filtration system that says the air moving. It's very noisy.
Does anybody have a need to share something of your reaction to that story? We will come back to everyone having a chance to speak, or many people, so it's not, don't think you need, but if you have to have a, yes, what?
Yeah.
I'm just curious, to me, that last sentence boils down to empathy. And I wonder what you think about that.
I think that it's very hard to be naked, literally and figuratively, and that all of us will be naked. You know, we all are going to have our moments, and in those moments, we are shorn of ourselves. We don't recognize ourselves. We don't know who we are. We become unselves. And when someone comes and says, whoever you are, you know, covered with blood, not only am I going to clean you up, but I'm going to make you feel better by telling you my story so that it's not all about you. There's something about that that is so cleansing and redemptive, not only for the person lying on the gurney covered with blood, but for the person who is giving the caretaking, that it's important to know not only what you can give, but what someone needs in that moment. And it was empathic, and it was also her need to tell her story at that moment, because I imagine she doesn't get listened to a lot as an aide with a hijab strolling around the halls. And it was the right combination. We were lucky.
I want to, oh, sorry.
When I think of resilience, I think it's often about taking a difficult situation and finding an action one can take to not feel so helpless in it. And this woman did that at the airport when she's going to the airport and had to find some way to get her mother in condition enough to leave. And she did it with you. You know, she saw a situation and felt like, I need to do something to make this better. And I think it's also a good thing when we do that for ourselves.
So I want to point out a very subtle thing here. If I heard you correctly, and I'm hard of hearing, you're talking about the parallel between her helping her mother and helping Elissa. Did I hear that correctly? So David Brooks has this. David Brooks and has this idea in conversation. He gives you in his new book, How to Know a Person, hints about how to have a good conversation. And he says, don't be a topper. And a topper is when somebody says, this is what's going on with me, and you go, oh, I know exactly what you're talking about because this other thing happened to me. That can be, as it was in your case, a tremendous source of commonality, of her wound and your wound being vulnerable to each other. And it can also, if said the wrong way at the wrong time, as David Brooks points out, say, I really want this conversation to be about me, not about you. I want it to be about my loss, my issue, my whatever, you know. So it's very complicated. It's very, very complicated, very subtle how we use our own experience to make connection and how we can use our own experience to distance ourselves or to shift it.
This guy, is Bruce Perry, is that a familiar name to anyone? It wasn't to me either. He's a child psychiatrist with a horrific personal backstory, and therefore I believe what he says, because he has lived catastrophe in his own life. And he is the go-to guy for mass catastrophes now. So he was the guy that they called after 9/11 to come and help with the first responders. And when there was a terrible earthquake in Turkey about 6 months ago, he was the person who was called to help the survivors to survive. And he has many intelligent things to say, in my opinion. One of them is that the farther you are from what has happened to someone, sometimes the less you know how to help them. You know, you want to, but the farther away you get from tragedy, the harder it is to recognize what someone needs. And so the gift, which this particular aid has, is to recognize what someone needs, to be able to offer not only what you want to give, but what it is that they need, which is sort of the anti-topper approach. It comes back around.
Yes.
So she was talking about herself, but it was because it was what I needed.
In her book, Habits of the Heart, who wrote Habits of the Heart? Atlas of the Heart?
Brene Brown.
Brene Brown. In Brene Brown's book about relationships, the Atlas of the Heart, she says, we relate best when we relate out of our vulnerability. So that maybe a topper is someone who, the anti-topper is to say, this is my vulnerability and yours. We're together in this aspect of being human. That's why we call this session the essence of being human. Was there someone else?
Is this okay? Okay. This past week, I was talking with a Jewish friend in New York, and we were just talking about how challenging the war has been and just general life. And she told me something I'd never heard before. Probably people have heard this, but I never heard it, which was that, generally when you're facing really traumatic scenarios, you have this, we've heard of the flight, the freeze, the fight. And she said, well, no, there's a fourth one. I'd never heard of the fourth one, which was, she calls it friend and tend. And I was thinking about some of the ways that I've been dealing, which is trying to just, when you read the last line of your story and it said, I did it because I feel better when I'm kind. And I realized that the only thing that's been helping me to feel better is to try to help other people. And is it altruistic? No, not at all, because it's helping me. But when you, Rabbi Rim, when you just said, what is the essence of being human? Well, these sort of pieces of, I freeze, I fight, I fly, or I friend and tend. And I thought, wow, that really is an essence of being human. And the feeling of kindness, it's a biological salvo for me. I mean, it just makes me feel better. So it just helped me bring some of this together.
Yeah, it's a mandate right now. In this world at the moment, kindness is not optional. It's a mandate.
Could you say that again?
It's a mandate to be kind when there's not always all that much else we can do.
Yeah. That's wonderful. It's a mandate to be kind. Could you read the next story for us?
Mm-hmm. There is a university in Chittagong, Bangladesh, you have never heard of. It will astonish you. About 1,500 young women attend from 18 Asian countries, most on full scholarship. What they have in common is that their own countries restrict all higher education for women. Among them are hundreds of young women from Afghanistan. Enormous logistical efforts were required to move them safely past the Taliban into the Asian University for Women. Family, familiarity, and certainties were all left behind. As you can imagine, they arrive in various states of preparation and trauma. The university offers fresh life, education, housing, social freedom, but there are few mental health services for many mental health needs. And so the university founder contacted an old classmate of his, a psychiatrist in New England, and she began by arranging a series of Zoom lectures for students on mental health and self-care. From 7,828 miles away, there was a talk on cultural adjustment, another on mindfulness, one on yoga and breathing, one on improving sleep, one on difficult feelings and conflict resolution, a couple on self-compassion. I spoke about writing for resilience. Our plan was to offer weekly workshops led by therapists, small groups that would write to careful, specific, sequential prompts in the hope of creating some kind of community, a house of support among students who didn't know one another, because in Afghanistan alone, there are more than 34 provinces and 14 different ethnic groups. Writing in the presence of others is a little like learning to breathe together. Afterwards, we hoped any member who felt comfortable could read what she had written aloud, and the group would reflect back to her how her words had moved them or left them curious. We asked the students to listen as if they were listening to poetry. Maybe this seems a little unsophisticated, a little simple, but a house of support does not need to be an architectural wonder. While I talked, some students scrolled through their phones, some popped open cellophane bags full of what looked like Fritos from 12,600 kilometers away. Some took diligent notes, and some rifled through backpacks for more interesting distractions. In other words, except for displacement, violence, victimization, hunger, devaluation, loss, abuse in inconceivable ways, and the fact that no well-intentioned American could possibly comprehend their experiences, they were students like any others. At the end, there were questions and comments. Many were hard to make out because of audio quality and accents. One young woman in blue jeans, misunderstanding, asked if we could give advice on improving her grammar. Another young woman in a chador, also misunderstanding, requested help with her term paper on globalization. Then a third young woman rose, very shyly, very confessionally. She said that she wrote in a journal every night, and it helped with her loneliness, and she hoped others might write because, she said shyly, maybe it would help them too. Then she smiled even more shyly when the auditorium full of classmates she knew and classmates she did not applauded her silently.
We arrange these stories in an order. This picks up on the comment that you just made before: the further you are from an experience, the less you can help. Does someone want to respond or say something about this story?
Hi. I'm not sure I can comment on tying it to the other one, but it sounds like you were saying resilience, it means taking a risk.
Yes, that shy young woman took a risk. Resilience is taking a risk.
Taking a risk.
Yes,
Stay inside yourself.
yeah,
And like you were saying before, you have to
Connect to other people.
yeah. She took a real risk. That's right.
So the response, the applause, I'm just thinking out loud here, the applause of her fellow students wasn't the content per se of what she spoke. It was that she clearly spoke from her heart about what gave her resilience every night.
Well, and that she bravely offered it to others, which was so brave in a room full of people she didn't know, obviously. And a room full of people in pain whose details she didn't know, just like they didn't know her details. This guy, Bruce Perry, who I'm temporarily very taken with, he says that what he does is he offers people the promise of time, that things will improve with time. And he knows this because he has seen it over and over again. And you may not believe it because you're in the midst of catastrophe. And it may not take weeks, and it may not take months, and it may take years. But eventually, what you realize and what is the primary curative approach is that the quantity, the potency of what you have to offer becomes equal to or greater than the potency of the pain that you're feeling. And that's when something can begin to change in terms of resilience. So for this young woman, simply to get up was such a magnificent beginning.
I'm so moved by two things, at least. One is that it felt to me like you weren't trying to say to them, I'm going to make you better, right? So that you understood what you didn't understand and just opened it up for them to help themselves by writing or to help each other, as this third woman did, which seems magnificent to me. It's the ultimate help I think someone can get. Second, you almost lost me when you started doing an equation. So I froze for a second, but I was resilient and came back. And third, I think resilience can also be, I don't want to say learned because I think that's the wrong word, but for myself, I had resilience from a very young age from my grandfather and from his love for me as I had some very difficult things in my childhood. And that has taken me through my entire life. I'm now 67. I was 3 when my trauma happened. And I still, when I need a place to go that's safe, that feels safe, I go to Shea Stadium and sit where I sat with my grandfather. And I close my eyes and I'm there. And then I have that, I feel that resilience, sort of like when you're filling your gas tank in your car, and it's very, very powerful.
In this particular school, before the first group that was led by group leaders from the United States, all of whom, including me, were very anxious because we didn't know what we were getting into technologically and certainly emotionally. And we had a script for the first meeting. And 2 days before the first meeting, there was a terrible death in the school in front of the students. And we didn't know whether we should cancel the groups. We didn't know the group members. We had never met anyone before. We really were at a standstill. And what we decided was that we would ask the groups what would be their advice, the members of the groups, what advice would they give to a dear friend who had had a terrible loss. So we didn't want to approach them heads on. We wanted to help them look out of the corner of their eyes. what advice would you give to a dear friend who had had a terrible loss? And, you know, these young women had such good advice, not only for each other, but obviously for us as the group leaders as well. Yeah.
What struck me about both of the stories is that these were two women who spoke, who were wrenched out of their familiar circumstances and had to go to a new circumstance. And then when they get to this new place of where they're residing, or, you know, not at home anymore, their homes have been taken from them. It's there that they see other people who can learn from their resilience, and that there's just I just was struck by the strength of the resilience of bringing themselves wherever they went, whatever the shocking circumstances, and that they were able to be so strong in themselves that they could then reach out to others in these very difficult circumstances that they're currently living in.
So I was wondering if you could verify that you said the applause was in silence. So that struck me in that what she did by taking that risk resulted in a communication that was felt but not heard. And she was able to reach the people, and she felt their appreciation coming back to her. And that was a reinforcement for what she had done. And that is the same as the feeling that the Afghan woman had said. She felt kind, and that reinforced her the most.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do the next story?
Got one more.
Okay.
That it's not just the action that someone does, but it's modeling bravery. And that when they silently applaud her, it's not just because of what she did, but what people learn from her. That it's not just a simple thing. It's not just being brave. It's what you learn from it and what you teach. Even if one person gets it and is brave because of that, it's really an interesting experience when someone's brave.
Yeah, that's so true when someone models for us. I don't think I'm breaking confidentiality 12,800 miles away to tell you two of the bits of advice that were given in the group for how would you comfort a dear friend. One woman in a burqa said, I would take her shopping. I would make her go shopping. And another woman said, young woman, lovely young woman said, I would go to her and I would go to her room and I would say to her, let us look in the mirror together. And if you are a person who needs to only see yourself, that's fine, and I'll leave you alone, because some people need to see themselves at times when they need comfort. But if we looked in the mirror and you saw me and you wanted me to stay, I would stay with you. Yeah.
Some people are artists in relationships. That was just first comment. I want to introduce a third story by saying that in our correspondence, I've named this story, maybe you named it. It's my favorite name for a story, my second favorite name. It's called The Hebrew School.
One night a week, in the sanctuary of a suburban synagogue, there is a free medical clinic. Parenthetically, since COVID, a large part of the clinic has gone virtual. More than 2,000 patients were treated there in 1 year, almost all immigrants, almost all uninsured. Providers aren't paid, but they feel richly compensated. In this free care clinic, the psychiatry department was an upstairs synagogue classroom that still carried the buzz of its afternoon activity. The whiteboard was covered with Hebrew letters. Open books were laid out on a conference table. You might wonder whether these afternoon students knew what transformation occurred in their room after dark. Mothers who couldn't sleep or eat because their sons sat in detention centers, laborers despairing from disability, the bewildered and overwhelmed, the panic-stricken and enduring. Need was high, pills rarely cured the essential element, yet everyone was grateful to a fault for attention. One night, there was still some Hebrew school homework on the conference table. I looked down at the sheets of paper and saw a quote from Martin Buber on the top page. He is perhaps the easiest of all philosophers for young idealists to romanticize. This is the sentence I found. Every person born into the world represents something new, something that never existed before. If there had been someone like them in the world, there would have been no need for them to be born. Maybe this was part of a final exam. Explain Martin Buber in 350 words. Waiting for the next patient, I read what some unknown student had written and thought, this could be a motto for the free care clinic. What I believe, the unknown student wrote, is each person was put on this earth to serve his own purpose, on this earth. That earnest repetition left a great impression on me. Here was someone accustomed to thinking with his thumbs on a keyboard, not to the ancient discipline of using a pen. His handwriting swooped upward at a 45-degree angle. It was as if his thoughts were approaching a summit. Maybe unfairly, I assumed that this was not a life touched by detention centers, poverty, and pain. But driving home, I saw it in my mind, the summit, that is. It was magnificently simple. On this earth, we have our own purposes, and why, barring the purpose of violence, should we not be left to serve them? In these impossible times, those words and their steep angle carried a tilt of irrepressible hope.
I want to just say a quick word about Martin Buber and his book, I and Thou, and Primo Levi and Viktor Frankl, and the tremendous wealth of Jewish philosophy and theology that's based upon the idea that this world is broken, and yet each of us is precious. Not and yet, and each of us is precious. And yet, although the world is broken, we can't fix it, but we should do what we can. And then each of us is unique in our ability to do it in that way, in a particular way. In the 13-Petaled Rose, Steinsaltz says it very clearly. He says there may be people who can do a certain task that you can do better than you can do it. But no one can do everything you've done in your life and you could do in your life exactly in the way you've done it, in exactly the situation in which you found yourself, in exactly the relationships in which you found yourself. So each of us has a role to play, and it takes, I think, a very long time, at least for me, to discover that role and to be satisfied with it, not to judge it about, I should be doing something else. There's a guy in the Celtics who's 6'1", 6'2", named Pritchard, and he's my hero because if I were going to be a Celtics, if everybody was 2 feet shorter, then I would be him, right? Like, there's all kinds of lives I could have lived, but this is the life I lived, and the best we can do is to have some respect, I think, for that life as in the form it takes, and to be resilient in the face of the challenges that challenge you to be different than your gift brings you to be. Want to do the next one?
No, I want to see if anyone has something else to say.
Anybody have anything they want to add to this particular story?
Okay. For many fortunate years, I lived on the 4th floor of a walk-up apartment in Cambridge. An elderly Portuguese widow lived on the 2nd floor. She spoke almost no English, but every time I climbed the back stairs with a man, her kitchen door would crack open and her face would peer out. "This your husband?" she would say. "No," I would say, and the door would slam shut. My landlady lived on the 3rd floor. She was shy to the point of social invisibility and lived a quiet life in her sunny kitchen. She didn't care if I was married or not, and her door was always open. She liked to serve tea to her tenants when she saw them pass by. This was another era of landlord-tenant relationships. One afternoon, I was climbing the back stairs. Life was bleak. I had no companion, no professional direction, no sense of possibility, no clear light ahead anywhere. I did not want a cup of tea, but my landlady's door was open. She bustled about with the saucers, chattering cheerfully as she liked to do. Then she must have sensed my mood because she stopped, she thought, and she said something I've never forgotten. "Elissa," she said, "you are a hidden treasure just waiting to be found." Those words have kept me company for over 40 years. They come to me in times of loneliness, in doubt, when mistakes have been made, when friendships have been lost, when there seems no clear light ahead anywhere. It wasn't that I believed what she said, it was that she said it with such fervency. We are hidden treasures waiting to be found, leaning on the faith of others in times when we have none for ourselves. Afterwards, my landlady and I drank her tea and ate her pizzelles. She is no longer alive, and I no longer live on the 4th floor, but we still drink the tea together. Listen closely. The unforgettable could be anywhere.
I don't know who said this comment, but the ability to have resilience, I think, is based on someone in your life, whether it be someone who is almost a stranger to you or a family member, believing in you, saying something to you that stays with you forever, that gives you the ability to power through really, really difficult times. And when you were sharing that wonderful quote that your neighbor shared with you, it reminded me of my mom when I was in college and I had 3 finals in a 24-hour period and I was ready to lose it. I called my mom, and it was an amazing thing that I got her on the phone because she worked full-time and was always going to school. And she said, "Andy, go outside, look at the blue sky, listen to the birds. Everything is going to be okay. You can get through this." And I'll always remember that. And it helped me, my mom's belief in me, helped me get through some really dark times in my life as an adult. And I think so much of resilience is having that interaction with a friend or a stranger or a family member that believes in you, and it helps you power through really, really tough times.
And you know, that's so true. And what is so interesting to me is that very often the person who has said the salient remark that you carry with you forever doesn't know that they said it. You know, the gift is given and the giver doesn't even know it.
One of the things I loved about what she said to you about you're an undiscovered treasure is, at least in my life, a lot of people looked at me from the outside and thought they knew what I would be good at. And they were wrong. And that I loved that she saw the potential and the promise in who you were and what you could become and what you could do, maybe. But she didn't try and dictate that path. And the second thing that I wanted just to share, which I may have shared recently, is that I had a 9th grade English teacher who was discussing Romeo and Juliet, and she had this whole section on what love was. And after all the students spoke, she said she believed that love had to start in respect. The basis of love was respect. And that was life transforming for me as a 9th grade student. And it was also has been transforming my life continually since then, to remember that.
A psychiatric mentor once said to me in a state hospital when meeting psychotic patients, you must begin every relationship by finding something to admire. It doesn't mean that you'll continue to admire it, but you have to begin by finding that.
Yeah, I guess it's working. I hope I can get this out right. When you told the story about the university students and the girl who said that she dealt with her loneliness by writing, I heard a loneliness in a new way somehow. Of course, she was away from everything that was familiar, so she had lots of reasons to feel lonely. But I think I get finally, even though I'm a person with a lot of connections, that it is our existential nature to be alone and to feel lonely because nobody can really know us. Even we have trouble knowing us. And so I'm putting that together with what Rabbi Rim said at the beginning about or you may have also, the mandate to be relational. And what a kind of beautiful dance that is, that we always feel lonely and we always reach out for connection and it gives us something, but that it has to be done again and again.
I think that's so true, that it has to be done again and again. And to put it in a more negative perspective, you acquire resilience and then poof, it's gone. You know, we're always in need.
I want to pick up on doing it again and again in just a moment. I just want to sort of, the part of my brain that talks about ideas sort of feels like a need to put some ideas on the blackboard, on the whiteboard. What does resilience require? It requires mindfulness. It requires patience. It requires watching and listening. It requires sometimes shifting your focus and having a friend help you shift your focus to the stars, to the big picture, or maybe as a story that Elissa wrote once, shifting your focus to something very specific, the dog, her dog, which we heard about last time. Or for me, in my case, I shift my focus during these hard days to playing chess with my 7-year-old grandson. So that's what I've done in the past year. That's sort of new to me, a new language. How can I don't know how to play chess. I haven't beaten him. I'm very proud of that. See me. But I'm not going to anyway. I always thought I was good at resilience, so I want to tell you about my breakdown. Ann and I shared this together, of course. So in 2021, right, April 30th, I had a pain in my side, and long story short, I took an x-ray, and it was kidney stone, and the report said also that there was a big mass with my kidney, the size of my kidney, that was suspicious for cancer. And we all found out this information on a Friday afternoon, and we hugged each other all weekend. And anyway, make a long story short, the 2021 kidney cancer thing was taken care of. I had it operated on, my kidney was taken out. My other kidney isn't so functional, but it's okay. We became macrobiotic. Thanks to Ann, I lost 50 pounds, and I'm resilient as hell, and I'm proud of it. Not only am I a cancer survivor, but I'm resilient. Terrific. Yes. Next summer, turns out, as we're doing scans to see how my kidney cancer is, they pick up some things in my prostate. So I got to have prostate stuff. Okay. Turns out, this is 2022, that this prostate treatment involved 44 trips to Mass General, back and down on Route 9, passing Dunkin' Donut after Dunkin' Donut, the occasional pizza shop, and one really wonderful mall that has an evangelical church and a pizza shop and a UPS store, all in the same place. 5 days a week for 9 weeks. I had to drink water 20 minutes before. I had to go in the waiting room. Then I would go into this big machine, pull down my pants, and sit on a table inside this big machine with people at computer screens looking at them. It's a very different kind of treatment, proton therapy, from having an operation. When all these nice people came in and they saw how I was doing, and they washed my hands, and they moved me, and they comforted me, and they were there, and nurses who touched me. So I broke down. And what does it look like when I broke down, when my resilience was gone? I started accusing my doctor. I would meet her every Friday. And I would accuse her of being a used car salesman. She said, listen, the best procedure for you, the way it actually worked is we first met her, not nurse, her resident or something. We got told every kind of prostate surgery you could have first, and then she comes in to seal the deal and tell me which one of these 5 or 6 things I should have, right? So you don't want radiation pellets, you won't be able to pick up your grandchildren. You don't want to have surgery, you just had your kidney removed. You don't want this, you don't want that. What you want is proton therapy. Very, very fancy therapy. And it'll be good for your body. And it was. I'm prostate cancer free. But here's what I wish she had said, and she didn't say it. She didn't say, and just writing this for this presentation is a kind of return to my resilience, this way of sort of yelling at her in front of you, right? This is what I wanted her to say. You might hate not knowing from week to week when you're going to have to be there. She said, you can come anytime you want. You set it up with them. It's not true. They set it up with you. And Friday, they tell you when you're going to come the next week. And it might not be the same time every day. You might hate having to devote your whole summer to becoming slowly weaker and weaker. You might be worn down by a kind of technical caring where you are actually ignored by your caretakers, whose job it is to watch the cyclotron. And you might not even allow yourself to feel these things because you'll be in the waiting room with kids and teenagers whose cancers are more obvious and devastating. So you won't think your feelings are worth anything until you explode at me, which you're welcome to do. She didn't say that, but I did explode at her. I said, you treat me like a used car salesman. Right? And I saw her every Friday for 9 weeks. And I finally went to the chaplain's office, right? And the head of the chaplain service is a Buddhist monk. So we did some mindfulness work and talked about how being present in the moment and reinterpreting the staff's caring, trying to understand that these people were looking at their screens and they did care for me. They really did care for me, but they didn't touch me, right? What helped me the most was her smile, because we Zoomed and it was in COVID and I saw no one's full faces during this whole time. No one's faces during this whole time. In fact, I had COVID at one point and I had to take the Uber down. Ann had COVID, and I had to go no matter what. And then not only do they treat me with masks on, but they're in hazmat suits. So I loved her smile. She just smiled at me. And then at one point she said, maybe you want to talk to me again. That's all she said. I mean, she said other things too. She gave me things to read. But her smile and her willingness to talk to me and her willingness to say, this is really hard. This is really hard was, brought me back. It didn't make me apologize. Well, I actually did apologize to my doctor, and she said it's okay, which in some ways I look back upon it was even worse because I still remain to this day uncertain whether she understood what I was going through. I don't want to badmouth the cancer clinic. I want to show you this. This is my certificate of completion. When you go get your proton therapy, there's a bell there that you ring 3 times. And I saw little kids ring it, and I saw teenagers ring it, and it says, in recognition of the successful completion of radiation treatment at Massachusetts General Hospital, thank you for your courage, cooperation, and trust in us. It has been an honor to be a member of your care team. So they did the best they could, didn't they? But I broke down, and I think resilience is something that comes and goes. And I hope that tonight is a way of us preparing ourselves for when we're going to need it again. And I want to put in a plug before we open up the floor and do Havdalah for a book that Beth is pushing called The Amen Effect.
I've already pushed it on
What?
a lot of these. I pushed it on a lot of these people already, but not everybody.
Well,
The Amen Effect
Amen, hallelujah, the Amen Effect.
by Rabbi Sharon Rouse, B-R-O-U-S.
So at the end, she gives a recipe for full relational living. 8 steps. Showing up, like go to Shiva. Comfort somebody who's mourning. Please hold on. Meet your neighbor. I'm looking at Ann and our neighbors, what it means to live in community at Brooksby Village, where our neighbors are come and go and they die and we make friends with them and then they pass away. Then we have to go through it again. And see no stranger. Know that we are in the divine image. Each of us is in the divine image. David Brooks says it's a moral stance to treat somebody else as if they are of ultimate worth. Come alive, which you do by serving. Grieve and live. This is very hard for me. Her example there is take a joy break. Take a joy break. Hold the healers. Don't grin and bear it. Sometimes it's good to say, I can't do this. Bear witness. That's sort of cute, isn't it? Bear witness. Bear witness. Be present. And finally, wonder. Breathe and stay at the table. There's a revolution going on. I think Shir Tikvah has been part of it for decades. I didn't understand that till recently because of the political climate that we live in, just how precious this community is and what it really stands for. So that's our sharing with you today, turning everything over to Beth, our partner forever.
Before I bring the microphone to you all, I just, I want to say thank you to both of you. As Rim was thinking about what he was going to teach on Yom Kippur afternoon this past season, he wondered, who he could pair with that would bring the richness, who could meet the richness that is in him. And I immediately thought of Elissa. And it is a great honor in my life to have this deep friendship with both of you and to sit at your feet and to learn from you. And in this moment, when we are in such a complexity, I feel like it's doing a direct line into our cells, into our veins of what it is we can be for each other. And there's been times when you have both been talking that I have felt like I was just going to burst out into tears. Rim, you wrote something in our notes that I hope it's okay that I share it with everyone that you didn't share. He wrote, I have a new philosophy now, not that I should be strong for you or that we should be strong for each other, but that we should relate to each other from the complexity of our strengths and our weaknesses. And I think that's right. It's always been right, but especially now. Not only since October 7th, but in the complexity that COVID brought to us. So I just want to say a couple of things and then be thinking about also what you want to bring as we begin to have sunset and Havdalah. There is such a hunger for holiness. When Audrey started off and said something like the word boiled down, I just remember that. And I was thinking, gosh, if we just lived in a time when something could be boiled down. Like, I feel like we've left the boiled down world somehow
it is, every single thing is so complex. How can we be our fullest, most alive selves when we are being so torn by the losses of life, by where do we stand? How do we stand on that front? But then how do we learn once again to open our hearts to each other and to not be afraid to show up for each other, to do the things that Rabbi Sharon Brous says at the end of her book. And so I just want to have this image in your mind, and I know that some of you have heard this from me, and that the Mishnah that she gained the inspiration from is this. It's a very beautiful, quick image. The temple is in Jerusalem, and 3 times a year, 4 times a year, the Jews would all come to Jerusalem, and they would offer their sacrifices, and they would enter the temple. And if you were a person who was hurting, had had a loss, were not well, for any reason, even if you had lost something, somebody taught me the other day, you would turn to the left. And if you were basically okay, intact, you would turn to the right. And the people on the left would go that way, and the people on the right would go that other way, and they would pass each other. And they would say to each other, Malach, Malacha, what has happened to you? What is going on in your life that you have turned to the left? Not with any judgment, but knowing that at any time, you would be the people turning to the left, that it is part of the human condition to sometimes be walking that walk, and sometimes to be able, the one who had the resources to say, what's in your heart? What's happened? And that you, Rim, through your sharing of your vulnerabilities, can open up our hearts. I think we all think sometimes we're the only ones who suffer, who feel unsure, who go through really hard things. It is such a gift. And Elissa, your stories bring us to the same place through the precision, through the brilliance, through the choice of words, through the vivid imagery. The stories live so strong in my heart, and I think in everyone's. And so our caring committee has the book now, Amen Effect, our co-chairs, and some of you have them. I've bought 12 of the books. I'm personally funding Sharon Brous's life, and it's like on a lending library. And so I have a list, a Google Doc of who has the books. When I get them returned, if you're interested in the book, just let me know. I'll put you on who you could be the next in line. Or I also recommend the Audible book. And I'm not an Audible book person because I fall asleep, but her voice is so great and she reads it so well, and you can just get it. I think Rim, you downloaded it, right? You did it Audible. You did it on Audible or Kindle.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's wonderful.
Yeah. So I highly recommend it so that we can be the community that we want to be, so that we can hear each other's stories, so that we can say, I'm here to learn what has happened with you and to be there for you, and to walk to the right, to walk to the left, and have it be this constant dance that we get to live with each other because we are blessed to be part of this community. So I want to thank you all for being here, for taking this time to be here, for those of you who joined us on Zoom and on Facebook and our streaming sites, and for those of you who are here in the sanctuary. It is such a gift. So could we just have a round of applause for these two? Yeah, we don't. Did anybody have a comment that they would like to make, Etta?
I think Rim at some point said something about someone helping you change your focus. And it reminded me of something that happened actually twice with my mother. When my daughter, she was 4 and she was having eye surgery, and my mother went with us to the hospital, and they took my daughter away screaming, "Mommy, Mommy." And I looked at my mother so terrified and so frightened, and she looked at me, and And she was so close to my daughter. They were always best friends. And she looked at me and she smiled and she said, "Now we can go eat." And I was like, well, my mother's not scared. Why would I be scared? And we went and ate, and I suddenly felt fine. And then when my grandmother was in the hospital, and we were very, very close, and we were taking turns going in to see her, and my grandmother said, "This is just too much. It's too much." And I thought, oh my God. And I came out, and I looked stricken, and my mother said, "Let's go eat now. It's lunch." And I'm like, my mother's not scared. It's fine. And it just got rid of my anxiety immediately, and I felt fine. Of course, she died 3 days later, but at that moment, I was like, okay, she's okay, I'm okay. And it just helped me on those 2 occasions, and probably many, many more times, that it just took all my anxiety and fear away.
Is there somebody who hasn't spoken yet? Did you?
I think this may come out wrong. I'm just going to say, I think that there is a real space for the violent part of resilience, that it's really raw, it's destructive. Physically, people lash out, people scream at people that are helping them. They might destroy things, they may hurt themselves. But I feel like there's a space for that is resilience in and of itself. You're fighting really hard, and maybe you're doing things that are not nice for other people. But I am learning that for me also, that sometimes, I aspire to do meditation and yoga and mindfulness and be kind to others, but sometimes I just need to rage. And I feel like that gets put in like the bad box, like I'm in the naughty camp when I do the bad things, when I did yell at a doctor, actually, also. And I'm going to say sorry to her, even though I still think she was wrong. Because of something very similar circumstances. And when I think about that, and I think, my God, I was really resilient at that time. And at the moment, for months, I felt terribly guilty. And I thought I did it all wrong. And then I look back and I think, no, that was resilient. So I'm trying to sort of rejigger the sort of spectrum here so that it's not all the pretty stuff in the Brene Brown and, like all the things you're supposed to do right, that some of the things that you do wrong have a space.
So we've heard a lot about Rim's resiliency, and through the stories that Elissa has mentioned. And it brings to mind the resiliency of another person that's involved in all this, and that's Anne Meyerowitz's resiliency. Although this might embarrass her, she is a model. And I feel we are blessed to have both of them together with us today, sharing their resiliency. I respect Anne so much for what she has done for Rim and enabled him to be here today with all his wisdom.
It's hard to follow that on, but I just want to go back to something you said at the very beginning, Rim, about the contagion. I can't remember what the words were, of not empathy, the contagion of something.
It's from that, from the doctor. Humans are
Relationally contagious, that's it.
Our feelings and behaviors are reinforced.
Right, and I think that, to me, like being relationally contagious, is what we do here all the time. And, right, and what you have done so much work on that with us over the years, that you've set it up that that's what we do, and that's how we meet each other, one-on-one and in groups. And I personally am profoundly grateful for that. But that contagion, it seems to me, is the key to resilience. You know, because if we can relate to each other, it's like what you wrote to Beth in that note. Thank you, Beth, for sharing it. It was very important to me. If we can relate to each other, we can both be stronger from it. And it's like that story you shared about when, you know, with the blood all over you and being in the hospital, like waiting there with blood all over you, and that the woman and the nurse in the hijab and reaching out to you and relating to you, and you sort of, you know, you listened as she spoke and she cleaned you up. There was this relational aspect to that interaction that obviously was profound, because you wrote about it and speak about it so beautifully and powerfully. And I'm very taken with that. I know my next thing I write, I'm in a writing group called Writing Resilience. It's been a life changer for me. But I know that's what I'm going to write about next week.
And it makes me wonder, Rim, like if you had been able to see the faces of the people who were doing the proton treatment, would it have made a difference? Would you have broken in the same way? The relationships are everything, everything. So this is so primal. This is the hearing of stories, the knowing of each other. Like I feel like we could be at any time in history right now, sitting around, soon to be sitting around a fire and just taking in wisdom, listening to each other, and it does something for the heart, as does a ritual. And so we thought we would take this 2 minutes to end this session with this ritual of creating space between what is holy, the holiness of Shabbat, and taking that sweetness and that wisdom, that holiness, into the week that we are about to start. And so I am wondering two things. I'm wondering if someone could pass out the lyric sheets for Havdalah so that everyone has one. Thank you, Heather. And I'm wondering, Bailey, would you mind lowering the lights? That the very bottom arrow will help get us in the zone. Can you still read the words? Yeah. Rim, could we switch? This will sort of work. I think you might have to hold it. It won't fit in. You have to hold it. So, four blessings: the wine, the spices, this beautiful fire, and then that separation between Shabbat and the rest of the week, the mavdil, the distinction. And in between each one, a nigun,
And I'm just wondering, do we want to get a little closer? Do you want, if, for those who want to come, come on up if you would like. Robin, I feel like you need to be up here closer. Yeah. Yeah. And come closer if you are willing to stand up and just make a little circle around here, standing in body or in spirit. And in the light of this fire, taking what we can of what we just shared, moving it into this week. Ya la ya la 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 ya la ya la 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 ya la ya la 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 ya la ya la la, and one more ya la ya la 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 ya la ya la 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 ya la ya la 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 ya la. And will someone hold up the wine, the Kiddush cup? Thank you, Lynn. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei peri hagafen borei peri hagafen. And just take a little sip. Ya la ya la 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 ya la ya la 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 ya la. No one else should take a sip. Ya la ya la la la. And will someone hold up the spices? Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei minei bor. And pass that around. V'samim borei minei v'samim ya la ya la 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 ya la ya la 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 ya la ya la 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 ya la ya la la la. Baruch, be really careful. Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei meorei ha'esh borei meorei ha'esh ya la ya la 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 ya la ya la 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 ya la ya la 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 ya la ya la la la. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamavdil ben kodesh lechol hamavdil ben kodesh lechol ya la ya la 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 ya la ya la 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 ya la ya la 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 ya la ya la la la. And now the sizzle of the candle into the wine, if we can get it out. Eliyahu Hanavi, Eliyahu Hatishbi, Eliyahu, Eliyahu, Eliyahu Hagiladi, Bimhera v'yameinu, Yavo Eleinu, Mashiach ben David, Mashiach ben David, Eliyahu Hanavi, Eliyahu Hatishbi, Eliyahu Shavua Tov, Shavua Tov, Shavua Tov, Shavua Tov, Shavua Tov, Shavua Tov. A good week, a week of peace. May gladness reign and joy increase. A good week, a week of peace. May gladness reign and joy increase. May it be so. Shavua Tov, everyone. Thank you all.
Thank you, Beth, for having us.
Oh, my.